Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled, From Formulation to Patient, How to Prevent Unforeseen Bottlenecks in Your Clinical Supply Chain. My name is Sonia Hunt, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, and that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require assistance, please contact me at any time by sending me a message using that chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and be made available to you for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Enside, who developed the content for this presentation. Enside, an innovative software consulting company, has been an active player in clinical trial supply chain management for almost 20 years. Using cloud-based cutting-edge technologies, their solutions optimize the entire clinical trial supply chain management process, from planning and production through to protocol design and delivery of supplies. The Enside suite for clinical trials enables the pharmaceutical and biotech industry to future-proof their clinical trial supply chain management while minimizing costs, drug waste, and always ensure proactive risk management for patients. Now, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today's event. Our first speaker is Sébastien Coppe. Sébastien has a Master of Engineering in Applied Mathematics. He obtained his PhD by creating a pre-diagnostic tool for patients suffering from Alzheimer's disease and other kinds of dementia by designing some mathematical modeling of the patient's brain behavior. He is working at Enside, where he has been leading the life sciences activities for multiple years, providing services to more than 30 pharmaceutical companies in order to optimize their clinical trial designs and supplies, thanks to forecasting and risk-based optimization solutions. Now I'm going to introduce our second speaker, and that is Cyrille Lefèvre, who is on the optimization of end-to-end clinical supplies with Enside for more than 7 years. He has experience advising both large and small pharma for the forecasting and optimization of their clinical trials for all phases and through multiple therapeutic areas. Cyrille also has extensive experience training teams focusing on strategic planning and planning and improving IRT resupply algorithms and the way they are used. And now, I would like to pass over the controls to our first speaker, and that is Sébastien. So Sébastien, when you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you, Sonia.
You're welcome.
So, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending this webinar that indeed will be speaking today about end-to-end clinical supply chain, and we'll try to address different aspects, different optimization aspects, from the manufacturing of drug substance, drug products, IMPs, down really to the dispensing of the drug to the patients at site level. And basically, this kind of clinical trial supply chain, we all know that we have a strong commitment to all the patients, making sure all the patients participating to our clinical trials are getting the drug on time. And still, we have a really pretty large end-to-end supply chain with many stakeholders, really super large timelines compared to other kind of supply chain. And I believe that's really the goal of today's discussion, is really making sure we can basically speak about this kind of large supply chain, all the bottlenecks, and basically how to improve your global R&D efficiency, I would say. And talking about research and development, this is really a large collaborative effort. So I believe it's involving a lot of stakeholders. You have drug development objectives within a given pipeline composed of different indications. You have basically priorities, timings, and at some point of time, budgets that are going to be allocated to different programs. And then later on, within a program, different clinical trials that are there to achieve your objectives and answer different questions regarding your drug efficiency. And basically, for each clinical trial, you will have then a protocol, will have a country list, you will have different kind of clinical forecasts, and all that will basically require a given amount of drug to be supplied, for all the patients. And that being said, it means that you need upfront to have started your manufacturing capabilities and make sure all your manufacturing will be allowing you to basically supply all the clinical trials in time. And that's really something super tricky because once again, we have really pretty large timelines from manufacturing timelines, but also shipping lead times that may be super long to supply your different depots, your different sites, your different patients. And that's once again our commitment as clinical trial managers. And that being said, means that if at any point of time within this kind of end-to-end supply chain, you would have something not working well, not working efficiently, then basically you will have some kind of bottlenecks. And the bottlenecks, maybe coming from many different places within this kind of supply chain, maybe coming from manufacturing, maybe coming more from the logistics part of the supply chain, maybe coming from time to time on the budget. And basically, as soon as you have this kind of bottleneck, it means that you will slow down your research. I believe we are all aware today we are in the middle of this COVID-19 crisis. And in the middle of this situation, basically, there are plenty of large and smaller pharma organizations that are looking for a solution to fight COVID-19. And I believe that's exactly fitting within this kind of objectives, okay? The goal is really to be fast. The goal is to be quick, to get to market new medicines, new treatments to fight COVID-19. But in order to be right, it really means that you should be aligned and making sure you remove proactively all your bottlenecks. And that's really not something easy. So the faster you want to go, in summary, the leaner you should be, and the most proactive should you identify and remove your supply chain bottlenecks. Okay, so talking about bottlenecks and end-to-end alignment, maybe it's the right time right now to pause and get your feedback on these topics: alignment, end-to-end alignment, bottlenecks, and really get your kind of feedback thanks to the first poll question.
That's right, Sebastian. Yes, I'm going to launch the first. Actually, we're going to have two poll questions. I'm going to launch the first one right now, and it should appear on your screen. And there it is. And the question is, how is end-to-end alignment in clinical supply chain currently managed at your company? Now, you have a couple of options below. Please vote on one. I'll give you about 35 seconds to complete this poll, and then I will share the results as this is done in real time. So audience members, please go ahead and look at the question there and cast your vote so that we can have everyone participating, and I'll share the results. And it looks like we have the majority of everyone voting, so I do appreciate that. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll give another 10 seconds, and then I will close the polls and share the results. And your options again are, as you see below, I have to do everything on my own. Alignment is based on emails and phone calls. Alignment is based on standard systems. Only parts of the alignments are supported by systems, or I don't know. So please go ahead and select one. And it looks like we have the majority of everyone has voted. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm now going to close the poll and share the results. And here are the results from our first poll. And the results are, I have to do everything on my own at 0%. Alignment is based on emails and phone calls at 40%. Alignment is based on standard system, 27%. Only parts of the alignment are supported by systems, that's 20%. And I don't know, it's 13%. So alignment is 27%, only parts are 20%, and I don't know, 13%. Thank you everyone for participating in that poll. And now I'm going to share the next poll question with you, poll question number 2, and it will appear right now on your screen, and there it is. And just like before, I will share the results with you as soon as I close the polls. I'll give about 35 seconds to do this poll. And the question is, how happy are you with the efficiency and optimality of your company's current end-to-end alignment? And your options are, pick only one. It's not working well at all. It's doing the job. Parts of it are working well. The other option is, it's working efficiently, but maybe not optimally. And the last one is, everything seems perfect. So if I can get everyone to go ahead and pick one of those answers there, that'd be greatly appreciated. And it looks like the majority of everyone has voted. So I'm now going to close the polls. Thank you, everyone. Closing the polls now. And now I'm going to share the results. So we have 7% at not working at all, 27% at is doing its job, parts of it is working at 47%, and 20% of everyone is saying it's working efficiently, and 0% everything seems perfect. Okay, thank you everyone for participating in that poll. It's greatly appreciated. Now I'm going to pass back the controls to Sébastien, and Sébastien, you may continue.
I believe it's really interesting. So the first poll question looks like part of the audience have standard systems like ERP maybe to handle this kind of end-to-end questions in terms of alignment. Sounds also that a part of the audience may be coming from, I would say, maybe smaller organizations that do not have today, I mean, large and really expensive ERP systems. And I believe that's really where also it's becoming really interesting to know how can you handle a lot of various sources of information coming from emails, coming from phone calls and different stakeholders. And I believe if the communication is managed mainly thanks to human beings, I believe that's really something that is both nice, but also, I mean, may also have a lot of kind of bottlenecks. And I believe that's also maybe a nice option, I mean, to have a look then to other kind of more standard optimization solutions, for instance. I believe the second poll questions also has shown that the efficiency sounds like not being perfect, but not being really close to zero, which is probably really positive also outcome of this poll question. I believe something in between, meaning that maybe you have part of your supply chain that you have control on, maybe also maybe you do not have a lot of transparency or visibility outside, I would say, your scope of responsibility. I believe that's also something that we may kind of leverage from the second poll question. So maybe that's really a nice transition to what Cyrille will actually show you right now and speak about, really making sure we can start this kind of end-to-end alignment and optimization questions.
Hello, everyone. So today we're going to try to take you on an optimization journey, which is a snapshot of the journey we follow when we start working with a new pharma company and try to improve the way they work and make sure that everything is streamlined from the very beginning of the supply chain all the way down to the patient. And so this presentation will be centered around two main parts. So the first part will be around improving what is probably your current way of working. So around making sure that we have reliable supply demands that will serve as a foundation for all the upstream planning of our supplies, trying to reduce the buffers at different levels, or even more importantly, making sure that everyone is aware of where we keep buffers, what they are for. Transparency will then be a very important part of the presentation, so making sure everyone is aligned on the decisions that are taken, and also making sure that the data is kept as up to date as possible. The second part of the presentation will be more around trying to give you some ideas to take your supply chain truly to next level and have this optimization mindset in your company and start to challenge things that you might not think you could challenge at this point by identifying what are your true global bottlenecks. A lot of sub-departments are probably working pretty well within your companies, but a lot of the struggles that we've seen is really in the moments where there has to be transfers of information between different teams, and that's really what we're going to try to be focusing on as well and make decisions as rationally as we possibly can. So to kick it off, we're going to introduce you to the two main protagonists that we're going to consider here in our little story. So we kind of simplified the structure of most large pharmaceutical companies, but this is really what it can be boiled down to. On the left-hand side, you have your study manager that is really in charge of managing individual clinical trials from a more operational perspective. So making sure that the kits that have been packaged make it to the patients in a timely manner and that we are able to supply all of the patients and make sure that our trial runs as smoothly as possible. So, and then on the right-hand side in the green, we have our program manager. The program manager will be in charge of gathering all of the demand coming from multiple clinical trials, and from there, building a supply plan going from the DS or API all the way down to your IMP, and making sure that the drug gets made on time to be able to supply the needs of the individual studies. And so we have two people that have, as you can imagine, to work together pretty closely. The way the communication actually works for most pharma companies right now is it's a pretty archaic system where the study manager computes some supply-demand signals for the individual trials that he's in charge of that then get provided once in a while to the program manager, and we'll see how these demand signals are computed in just a minute. So how are demand signals computed? How are these demands from studies computed when they are to be sent to the program manager? Everything obviously starts off with the patient demand. That's really the first step of that process, is understanding how much kits we will be needing to supply our patients for our trial. So you know how many patients you'll have in your trial, how much drug each of them will need, and you can compute it that way. What we wanted to stress here in this first step is the fact that this is more often than not done in a very over-optimistic way, let's say. For example, we're going to consider that all of our sites are all open at the same time and we'll start recruiting at full speed right away. Is that a reasonable assumption for all of our trials? Maybe not, and it's something that we will see that we can challenge. The second step that our study manager will usually go through, and it could be part of the same step, but is that there will typically be a significant amount of overestimation of the demand. And so what we mean by that is that since a lot of assumptions are unknown at the start of a trial, the study manager will consider the worst case in terms of demand. For example, we might be in an oncology study, we consider that no patients will ever drop out of the trial, which is very unrealistic. Or we're going to consider that all of our patients weigh 200 kilograms because that's the highest weight that is part of the protocol. So it's kind of representing these very unlikely cases to make sure that we have enough to supply our trial. On top of this now overestimated patient demand, the study manager will typically add an overage to make sure to account for any waste in the supply chain that might be associated to expiry replacement because drug doesn't have an unlimited shelf life, or because of our depot network, and it might take a long time to reach our different, some of our sites. Here, the study manager chose 30%, but is that really too much? Is it enough even to supply our patients? It's very, very hard to tell. And actually, this is really the demand signal that is then going to be provided to our program manager as a baseline. And as you can imagine, it's actually pretty overestimated compared to what the reality would probably be, and mainly to provide a sense of comfort to the study manager. But obviously, you can imagine that it doesn't help the program manager down the line. So that leads us into our third poll question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much, Cyrille. Yes, we're going to launch our third poll question for our audience members to engage in, and it should appear right now, and there it is. Just as before, it's done in real time, so I'll share the results to you once I close the poll. So your participation is really greatly appreciated. This is a multiple choice, so you can pick whichever ones you like that best suit you. And the question is, what do you see as the biggest source of waste in supplying your clinical trials? Complex study designs, inaccurate clinical assumptions, depot management, short shelf lives, or long manufacturing lead times. I'll give another 10 seconds as it looks like the majority of everyone has voted, so I do appreciate that. Okay, and I'm going to now close the polls and share the results with you. Okay, closing the polls and sharing the results. And here are the results from our third poll question. Complex study designs at 56%, inaccurate clinical assumptions 63%, depot management 6%, short shelf lives 13%, long manufacturing lead times at 25%. Thank you everyone for participating in that poll question. Now I'll return it to Cyrille. Cyrille, you're ready. You may begin.
Thanks, Sonia. So that's really super interesting outcomes regarding this feedback, because I believe having complex protocols, I believe that's more and more complex. That's definitely the trend within the industry, having more, I would say, clinical trials that may evolve within the trials, basket trials, a lot of cohorts and so on. I believe it's not making our supply chain lives, I would say, easier. I believe how to make sure the clinical forecasts are more and more accurate, that's definitely something we'll also address in a minute or two. Another really interesting point regarding, short shelf life, that sounds like also complexity factor. We have also to keep in mind that with the rise of biotech drug, we'll have also, shorter and shorter shelf life, at least compared to a couple of years ago, the shelf life that we may have, had with different kind of more chemical drug. And of course, if we do not today put in place the right processes, the right technology, the right systems, I believe the situation regarding clinical supplies may be more and more difficult to be managed from a waste standpoint. And by the way, do you know a bit how much waste do we have in general in any kind of standard clinical trial if we do not have an optimization system? So that's really a question, a bit provocative question that we did ask with multiple pharma partners that we have been working with. And actually what we have done is really assessing this kind of question within a large set of clinical trials that were just ending between 5 years ago to 2 years ago. So we have had more than 700 trials for coming from 4 top 20 pharma companies that were basically assessed within this kind of global analysis before any kind of usage of optimization services. And actually, the results, the outcomes are kind of shocking. 70% of the drugs that are packaged, so 70% of the IMP packaged and released within clinical trials of these 4 top pharma companies were never dispensed to patients, which means that out of 100 IMP packaged and released for trial, only 30% of the IMP were dispensed to patients. So it's really, kind of shocking results. And what was really surprising also, for those kind of pharma companies is that, of course, does not mean that all the study supply chain managers were, managing, their business in an easy way. I would say that they were still doing a lot of firefighting activities to ensure the supply continuity for the patient's well-being. And I believe it was more high level of waste accepted by pharma organizations regarding the commitment that I was mentioning a couple of minutes ago, the strong commitment on making sure we do our best as clinical trial supply chain managers to make sure all the patients will have the drug on time. And it's not because you're committed on that you should work with this kind of very high percentage of waste. And that's, I believe, really the goal of this presentation as well. So how can this be improved thanks to optimization solution? First, the patient demand will be much more reliable. So I believe it may benefit from machine learning to increase the accuracy of the demand forecast. And that's really something super key, making sure this demand forecast is really super reliable and increasing really the accuracy of any kind of clinical forecast. I believe that's really one of the outcomes from the last poll question, making sure you can really leverage real-time data and increase the accuracy of this kind of clinical forecast will allow you to have more and more trust in this kind of reliable patient demand shown in orange here. And then thanks to risk-based optimization and a perfect alignment between decisions taken at your IMP packaging plan for your depot resupplies and at site level, thanks to IRT settings optimization, you can definitely strongly reduce the required overage to safely supply your patients. So that's really this kind of 20% shown here, which means on average, the waste level may be decreased to something much lower. Let's say something like 29%. And where is this 29% value coming from? We have done, the same kind of really similar analysis, really following exactly the same kind of methodology based on 780 trials for all different pharma companies that have had more than 5 clinical trials ending, with all basically the key decisions being optimized and all the trials ending within the last 5 years. And basically, that's really the outcome. Only 29% of the IMP packaged were not dispensed to patients. So 2 minutes ago, I was really showing you 70% of waste. And right now, when you do optimize at trial level and make sure you do align all your decisions, you do improve the accuracy of your clinical forecast, you are down to 29% of kind of waste, meaning that more than 70% of the drug packaged will be dispensed to patients. So that's really something very big difference. Once again, with really proactive risk management, which means that there were no more firefighting activities. I would say on the opposite. I would say with some kind of risk-based optimization approach, you should be able to proactively anticipate any kind of risk arriving at different parts of your supply chain and being able really to proactively take the right actions. How does such an optimization solution looks like? I propose to let Cyrille give you a short demo of such a solution that will allow you and really multiple stakeholders to connect the dots between various teams and departments and various pieces of data.
Thank you, Sebastian. So yeah, we're going to now show you a little bit of our tool. We're really focusing on the interaction between our study manager and our program manager, making sure that you at least get an idea of how that can work and how it can really be improved by having the proper systems in place. So this is the tool that we're going to be discussing today. And we're going to be really, for now, focusing on this graph in the middle of my screen. And so what you can see is we have this graph that has a number of colored dots on it. And the x-axis of the graph represents the risk level. So the further to the right you are in the graph, the more risky the strategy is. If you look at the y-axis, that represents the total cost of supply. So obviously, the place you want to be is as far to the left to have a safe strategy and as low as possible to keep the costs under control. And each of the dots in this graph actually represents one way that you could manage your clinical trial. For example, if we compare between this dot here, orange, that is with a slightly higher cost but a lower risk, might be a strategy that has a higher buffer level that has been set up at the site level. So it means that we might increase the waste a little bit, but it allows us to decrease the risk quite significantly. This other dot that is around $8 million cheaper would be a strategy where we have lower buffer levels at the site, so we're taking a little bit more risk, but you can see it might allow you to save $8 million on the supply of your drug. And the number of scenarios that you can test out here are kind of infinite. You can see here we tried out different comparator sourcing approaches, different IRT providers to see what the impacts of different resupply algorithms could potentially be. And for each of the dots, we have a detailed reporting of what our overage would look like, what is the risk associated with it, the cost, the number of shipments, the number of kits that we expect to have. And that's really the game that the study manager is going to play, is really come up with all these different strategies of different ways that the study could be managed. And it could be a whole webinar in and of itself to discuss that, so I won't be going into more detail than that. But the goal of the study manager in the end is really to pick one of these strategies. So let's say I pick this pink one here. That will then become my demand signal that I will be sending over to our program manager. Now let's switch the focus a little bit and focus more on what a program manager would see. So a program manager would log in to the dashboards here and just be able to log in and connect to the dashboards very easily. And this is the place where he'll be able to automatically see this aggregated supply demand coming from all the different trials. So you can see, for example, in this demo program, we have 5 different trials that are coming into play, some of them being bigger, some of them being smaller, and all the demand, all the supply demand coming from all these trials is aggregated and can be visualized on a yearly, quarterly, monthly level, however you want to do it. If the program manager then wants to focus on just an individual study, you can just simply click on it to filter and see all the data for that particular study. And the key here is that everything is now accessible to the program manager. They have real-time access to the latest information that has been computed by the study manager. And if they even want to dig deeper than that, they even can have access to the assumptions that were taken into account to get to know the trials a little bit better. It's not simply at that point a demand number and a study code that gets transferred over, but also an idea of the number of patients, how aggressive we might have been in coming up with this demand, making sure that all of that is much more of a communication. Okay, and that kind of leads us into this second part of the presentation, where we're going to highlight the fact that thanks to this increased communication and much more direct communication, we'll be able to bring these two functions together much more closely.
So indeed, what Cyrille just shown you is only a small part of how an optimization solution may help increasing the direct communication between multiple stakeholders by leveraging data in a transparent and actionable way. So in our example here, the study and program managers will be able to exchange in a more straightforward way. And how does it look like concretely? Imagine we would have 3 clinical trials being optimized. Here our 3 clinical trials are represented by the blue color, the orange one, the pink one, and basically this would give the aggregated demand signal that Cyrille was speaking about. That's the blue curve here, that the program managers would be able then later on to translate this demand into some drug products, drug substance manufacturing plan. And in this example, the program managers will be scheduling 4 drug substance manufacturing runs. So you can see here the 4 manufacturing runs. But then imagine right now that you would be able to optimize your 3 clinical trials, which means that this would significantly reduce your demand. The blue demand curve, being really replaced by the green curve. And this allows right now the program managers to schedule only 3 runs of drug substance instead of 4 previously. So being able really to leverage on the upstream part of your supply chain, any gain coming from the downstream part is really, very important. And that's not something easy. And with an end-to-end optimization solution, this is automatically the case. And Cyrille will right now show you a small portion of the outcomes you may get from an optimization solution report.
Yep, thank you, Sébastien. I think you made it look very easy, the role of the program manager. Obviously, it's a little bit more complex than that, and we'll get into the system itself. But what is key here to keep in mind is that the clinical field is a very, very complex world, and a lot more complex to optimize than your actual commercial supply chain. And so the outputs that we're going to be looking at here have been optimized, taking into account all these specific constraints that are associated with the clinical world, all the stability part of it, all the regulatory that is associated with it, all the unknowns that are coming from it. And that is really the key, is to remember that these are constraints that are really key and central to your clinical supply chain to make sure that you supply it properly. And so all these nice gray boxes that Sébastien was showing you that were representing the individual lots associated with that particular trial can actually be found in this report that is generated from our SaaS solution, where you can here see the planning from your DS that is here at the top all the way down to your IMP of all of your different lots. And each lot, let's maybe focus on this DS001 lot first, has a manufacturing date that is associated, a date of availability, at which point the manufacturing is completed, and then a date of release as well. It can also have an expiry date that is associated with the lot as well. And this reporting allows to really serve as the foundation for everything and to ensure full traceability of how lots are getting used. So for example, this lot of 50 liters of API, we will be using 49 kilograms will be able to be transformed into DP, and 1 liter will then be used as sampling. For the second lot of DS, this DS002 lot that is planned for March 2022, with the current demand, we actually won't be able to use all of it. You see, we're actually manufacturing 40 liters of API for that run, again sampling 1 kilo, but we will only be able to transform 17.3 liters of this API into DP. Why is that? It's because maybe we have some bottlenecks in our supply chain, and we'll look into that in just a bit. Another part of this reporting that I would like to draw your attention to is this column here on the right that highlights the costs associated with this supply plan. It will come into play quite a bit later on to be able to truly assess what is the cost associated with this particular setup that we have here. This is obviously a lot of data to show to you in just a couple minutes. I would expect that some of you are more visual, so let's maybe look at a little visual of how that could look. This is a pretty standard concept in supply chain. It's a supply versus need graph. Even for those of you that have never seen this, it should be pretty easy to understand. You have two curves. The green curve represents your needs, so your demand coming over from each of the individual studies. And then in blue, you have your supply. And you can see these big blue bars represent the different lots that are getting optimized by the system. And that's really key, is the system will really adjust the quantities to the actual demands at different points in time. You can see not all these bars have exactly the same size. So the more flexibility you allow the system, the more it will be able to automatically compute a more optimal solution that is with DP lots that are very much aligned with the demand and making sure that everything is tied nicely together in the most optimal way possible. And the really cool thing is you can even look at that all the way up to the DS level. So you can see here all the demand that is coming over from the individual studies as IMP initially actually automatically gets transformed into RDS down the line. And you can see this green curve now represents the demand of DS that has been multiplied by the right multiplier as well as shifted in time depending on the manufacturing lead times. And we can see the two lots that we were just looking at. So we have our DS1 lot that is showing up here in March 2020 that will last us for quite a while. We have our DS2 lot where we're making a little bit less in May 2022. And we can see that towards the end, we are still left over with quite a bit of the second lot towards the end. You can already see and start seeing the bottleneck here that is coming into play. It's probably that the lot sizes and the sizes of the bioreactors that we have available might prevent us from making smaller lots, and that's why you can see that we are left over with so much DS towards the end. Okay. Now I'll hand it over to Sébastien from there.
So thanks, Cyrille. So what we have been talking so far is basically the ability to optimize at trial level, and then the ability to leverage this reduced demand at, I would say, program level, and make sure, I mean, as Cyrille has shown you, that you can truly optimize. So the Excel report that you have seen is really the outcome of an optimization tool, which means that you do not have to define the timings or the size, let's say, of your batches. I mean, that's really something that will be the outcome of the optimization solution. So that's really super nice, and that will allow you to have full traceability from drug substance, drug product, IMP, as Cyrille has shown you. That's great. But as Cyrille highlighted already, there may be still a couple of bottlenecks. Maybe the lot size are not right. Maybe you may challenge other aspects to right now make sure you can challenge your current constraints. And this will allow you to further reduce the waste at manufacturing that is highlighted in gray here. But which bottlenecks do you want to tackle first? Because probably you may identify a lot of different aspects that are just reducing a bit the efficiency of your global end-to-end supply chain. Do you have to first challenge your manufacturing lot size at DS level, maybe at DP level, or more at, challenging the way the lot allocations are managed? Maybe you have some internal constraints there. And maybe you have super long timelines at different steps of your supply chain, or maybe it's more about a new indication, new drug, and right now you have a really short shelf life, and maybe you want to challenge a bit the stability plan and maybe add a new milestones. To be granted, another kind of shelf life extension. Maybe it's more about resource allocation, about which kind of manufacturing resources can you rely on internally, externally, outsource. And these are many just probably examples that may be really related to your creativity, and that's really something which we would like right now to get also your feedback about. How do you want to kind of prioritize, or how is it really managed right now within your kind of companies in terms of trying to define priorities within all these kind of potential improvements?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sébastien and Cyrille. Yes, we're going to launch our final poll question for this webinar, and you'll see it appear right there in front of you, and there it is. And just like before, we're doing this in real time, so I will be able to share the results with you right as soon as I close the polls. I'll give you about 30 seconds to complete this one here, as it is a multiple choice. You can use multiple answers here to pick from. And the question is, where do you currently invest the most to improve your processes and reduce bottlenecks in your clinical supply chain? And here are your options: improve yields, reduce lead times, data available and transparency, cross-function communication, additional manufacturing capabilities. It looks like we have the majority of everyone voting, but I'd like to get a couple more people on there to vote. So if you can go ahead and please cast your vote right now, it would be greatly appreciated. I'll give you another 10 seconds for that, and then we will close the polls, and I will share the results. Okay, so I'm going to close the polls now. Thank you everyone for participating in that poll. I'm closing it and sharing the results. And here are the results. 13% improved yields. We have 20% reduced lead times, 40% data available and transparency. And look at this, 60% cross-function communication, and we have 33% at additional manufacturing capabilities. Thank you everyone for participating in that poll question. I'm now going to return it to Cyrille and Sébastien.
Thank you. And I believe it's really indeed, great, to see, the outcomes of this survey. I believe it's highly connected to the current webinar about making sure data is available, transparently shared and communicated between different stakeholders, but also making sure you can reduce timelines. I believe that's probably something really, very important, very key. Trying to make sure you can reduce the global waste. And I believe that's exactly one of the examples that we'll try to address right now. So really coming back to the couple of examples that we were talking about, and I believe it's really heavily, as mentioned, connected to the answers of the audience. Which kind of direction do you want to investigate? Basically, what you may try to assess quickly is, how much time, how much effort, would this be representing? How much budget maybe? Because basically you have a limited amount of available resources, and resources may be time for your department, resources within your department, but also definitely budget. So, do you want to choose, 2 or 3 options, and this may be fitting within your budget, or do you want to choose another one? Maybe these 3 ones, or maybe these 3 ones. How to choose? That's really something really not easy. And that's really something that you would love really to be able to not just rely on your gut feeling, on your prioritization of these investments, but making sure you can really be relying on data, on facts, really showing really the added value of right now, today, investing on this priority.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. And this should really be done at a global level. And that's really the challenge here is it's a lot harder, obviously, to improve bottlenecks that impact you that might not necessarily be within your control of your department. And so that's why it becomes really key to be able to put a number on these improvements, to be able to really say how much it could truly impact you. It's not that emotional decision, but making it much more rational when possible. And here we're going to take a very real case study that we optimized for one of our pharma partners pretty recently to give you an idea of the type of things that we would challenge. We felt that it gave you a pretty wide range of things that could be assessed for a particular compound. So just to give you an idea of the scale, this was a project that has an initial budget of around $90 million with the baseline, with all the constraints that they had currently in place. The first one that you can see here in green on the left side of your screen is highlighting the lot sizing constraints. And that's, I would say, the first one that we always try to challenge when working with pharma companies. It's this idea of the lot sizes. To give you an idea of what we mean by that, is that usually, whether it's because it's easier to do in an Excel or because CMC contracts are designed that way, but a lot of program managers will consider that the lot sizes are actually fixed, that they have no control over that. The only control they have is over the number of lots that they have to schedule. as well as their timing. But what we see is that even though it might somewhat be the case at the API level, because you probably want to use your slots as much as you possibly can and make sure that you're using these valuable resources when possible. But if we're looking at least at the DP level and the DP fills that you might be making, that is not really the case in practice in a lot of cases. So what we just simply did here is removing the limitation of having to make, in this case, 50,000 units at a time, and not in any way increasing that maximum, but just allowing the system to plan for smaller lots with a cost incentive there. So the lots had a fixed cost plus a variable portion to account for cost savings if the lots were a little bit smaller. And what you can see is that just by doing that, not in any way increasing the size of the lots, we were already able to save for this program $9 million there. So pretty easy to put in place. The worst that could happen is you might need to renegotiate your CMC contracts. It's worth looking into anyway once in a while, but definitely here the cost savings are quite significant. The second one that might be a little bit more tricky to put in place, but we've definitely done in the past, is challenging the stability plan a little bit. So for a lot of program managers, the stability plan comes in as an input, and it should be, obviously, but it doesn't mean that we don't necessarily have some control over it. And one of the controls that we could ask for is potentially to add additional stability pools, to not go right away from 12 months to 24 months, but add an additional pool in the middle to hopefully get 18 months that will help us to better supply our trials. And what you can see here, for all these trials that are starting between the 12 months and the 24 months, this can have a very big impact on the waste level. And you can see here for this example, even though the savings aren't as great as for the lot sizing, still allowed to save $3 million over the course of the program. Still very much worth it. The third example that we have here on the screen is related to the downstream lot allocation. So one of the examples there is, for example, to allow mixing of different DS lots to make one lot of DP. Here, the main challenge is more around regulatory and all the paperwork that goes around doing that. Again, relates back to the systems, to making sure that you can track exactly how lots were made. But you can see here that by simply alleviating that constraint and allowing it, it allowed to save $2 million additional dollars. Whether that's worth it or not, all the hassle of doing it, that's up to you to say, but it's definitely not a small amount of money. And so what we're going to do is take all these examples that we have, and the nice thing of having a system that does all the optimization for you is that you can very easily test a very large number of these different scenarios to really, at that point, your imagination is your limit. So here we took a simple example with our 9 different bottlenecks that we've identified. And you can see that obviously the savings that are brought are not necessarily aligned or correlated with the investment that is required to put them in place. And that's really what we're going to be playing with here. And that's where, again, we're bringing the decision making over which of these bottlenecks to tackle first, from a purely emotional decision of what is easier to a purely factual, where we now have a number to put on each of these improvements. We still work with the same budget, obviously, and there we go. These are the 3 that will bring us the most value, and with just these 3 improvements there that are very much implementable, we are able to save $14 million on our program, which is 15% of the initial budget. And there we go. That's the end of our optimization journey for this program, to give you a little bit of a glimpse as to how we would tackle this and make really lasting changes on the program.
Thanks, Cyrille. So it's really basically the end of the presentation. So what did we speak about? What did we show today? First, piece, and I believe there are really 4 pieces. First piece is really the one, focusing on optimizing the clinical trial design, clinical trial supply chain, and basically reducing the needs. That's really super important. And there are different right now technological tools and within an optimization solution that is then definitely making sure you can monitor your trial in real time so that you cannot have any risk for patients not being anticipated, which means that you can, on top of reducing the needs, reducing the waste, definitely also make sure you can anticipate and reduce firefighting activities for your study supply chain managers. Second step and second part of the puzzle is really making sure you can leverage all these kind of reliable demand forecasts coming from different clinical trial in order really to optimize all the manufacturing decisions. And really that's really the second part, the Excel report that Cyrille has been showing you. That's really the outcome about when to manufacture, which kind of lots, which kind of size, which kind of decisions, how, to allocate the lots and so on. That's really something super important. That the third part is really more about one step further, which is more about, right now you have some optimization, end-to-end optimization, but within some kind of given constraints, and how to challenge these constraints, how to identify and remove the bottlenecks based on really fact-based decision-making in terms of prioritization. And that's really something super important. If you want to be quick, if you want to be fast, if you want to be lean, you have definitely to manage your investment priorities. And then the last one is definitely, an important one, and probably the most important one for today, is definitely about when you have gained resource flexibility, how to leverage this kind of resource flexibility. And then, of course, you may have a lot of ideas. Maybe you want to start new clinical trials within your indications or within new indications. Maybe, bring earlier the start of some clinical trials that were limited by more manufacturing capabilities. Maybe you can also boost the recruitment, which is great. Or just, say that you will not use some kind of manufacturing resources and make sure these resources can be allocated to new programs. And basically, at the end of the day, what you may expect is definitely having a strong impact on your ability to bring your new drug to market. The time to market will definitely be reduced, and that's really something super important. I was mentioning again the COVID-19 situation in the beginning of this discussion. That's exactly what we all want, reducing the time to market. But it's not just for COVID-19. All the clinical research that we are all involved in are always, tackling some really important questions, and really this acceleration of time to market is really something key. And I believe these kind of different aspects of the optimizations, end-to-end optimization, is always trying to focus and bring some solutions in terms of accelerating the time to market. So thank you for your attention. And I hope you have a lot of questions. I believe we have a couple of minutes left to answer all these.
Yes, we do. We have a few minutes left. So I just like to say thank you very much, Sébastien, Cyrille, for that great presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Now, I would like to invite our audience to continue sending in their questions or comments right now using the questions window for the Q&A portion of the webinar. I've already received some questions, so I will start with those. So Sébastien, Cyrille, if you're ready, I will begin with those. The first question I have here is, could you give, or this is for Sébastien, could you give other examples of bottlenecks that you have experience investigating?
So yes, I believe bottlenecks, one important one related to, once again, for instance, on the COVID-19 situation, scale-up strategy. That's really something super important. When to go, when to move from pilot to industrial scale in terms of timing, in terms of, once again, resource investment, making sure you can also discuss about outsourcing versus in-house production. That's really something really, really important that may be a strong bottleneck. And once again, not just in this kind of extreme example of COVID-19 research. We have been talking about process enhancements, improving the yields. That's really something also that is a strong investment, but improving yields or lead time reduction is really something super important. Another one that may be really interesting to be kept in mind is more related to a stability plan. It's more about how to start working at risk, meaning that before being granted a new shelf life extension, by when can you start, for instance, manufacturing your IMP lots before kind of any shelf life extension being confirmed or being started, more about packaging or labeling activities. And I believe that's really something that you may easily assess the risk that you are going to take, but also the benefits you can get later on. But once again, as Cyrille mentioned, sky is the limit in terms of how much creative scenarios you want to challenge and investigate. I believe we have been testing, a huge list of various kind of potential bottlenecks. And from time to time, we were really surprised to see the outcomes and how much some small things can really strongly benefit, let's say, to the program or to the portfolio of the pharma company.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think we have time to squeeze in a couple more questions here. So this question here is for Cyrille. The question is, how can you measure the benefits of this?
That's a pretty good one. It's definitely when you're trying to improve your supply chain, it's very helpful if you can start off with a baseline. And so to give you an idea of what a baseline could be, it's this 70% number that we showed earlier in the presentation, highlighting what the current situation looks like. And what we've seen is the clinical supply chain is always under so much pressure that there is very little of these KPIs that are actually tracked. And that is really key in being able to take, to reliably assess what the benefits of such improvements will be. And so as you can see, it's an exercise that we can do, that we've done in the past for clinical trial supply, and you saw the results there. It all depends on the data that is available, but I would definitely encourage everyone listening to make sure that they are able to look at the data they have available and build these types of KPIs to really see how well they are doing in this optimization journey. And knowing where you start is usually very, very valuable.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We have another question here. In the web interface production section, what denotes the size of the bar in the Gantt chart?
So that's the size of the lot. So on the y-axis, you had the scale of that, just highlighting how many units are getting manufactured at that point in time.
Okay, here's the next question. This one is for Sébastien. How do you get buy-in for this type of improvement from other departments?
So that's really a good question, because it definitely, connects to more global, I would say, change management aspects. And I believe indeed most of these kind of investments or improvement points, may impact multiple departments, which means that you should definitely try to assess how much, time, energy, budget, you would need, to make sure you can align basically all the stakeholders, get buy-in. And I believe that's really, once again, this kind of optimization solution may bring you all the facts, the data, and I believe that's always something that is good, to start the discussion. Then later on, you may challenge the accuracy of the data or the quality of the inputs and so on, but that's more something that will drive, I would say, the business excellence. And I believe that's always something good when you can drive the discussion based on facts and on data. But then later on, you have this business case and you try really to find the right sponsorship. For some of these kind of investments, you may need to just escalate a bit. And I believe these kind of business cases are really something that usually are super, let's say, interesting for really the top management. Because once again, we are speaking about timelines, about reducing time to market. And once again, we are then, getting really the interest from really the top management.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We have time. We'll squeeze in a couple more questions here. Here's the next one for you. Could you give some examples of the added constraints that you can find in the case of clinical trial optimization that you don't have in classical production, constraints that you need to integrate?
So a lot of them are really linked to the allocation constraints and the size, right? Usually a clinical project is a lot smaller. So a lot of the constraints that are actually present in the commercial supply chain are not necessarily always accounted for because they have very limited impacts overall. So the main example there is one that we took earlier of saying that it's never allowed to have multiple lots of DP that go into one lot of IMP, for example. That's definitely one. The other very important part of it is definitely related to the stability that we've talked about already quite a bit. And for example, our tool will be able to say to wait a couple months, for example, to manufacture the next lot, because it will allow it to have the better shelf life available. And all of that being built in ensures that the optimal solution that is provided it is truly the best one, and that you'll very importantly, that you'll be able to implement it in practice.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll try to squeeze in another question here. How can we go from identifying the bottleneck to actually implementing the solution? And I believe this question is for Cyrille.
So that one is something that has to be taken more on a case-per-case basis, depending on where your organization currently stands. And that's where, to some degree, the systems can only take you so far. And it's an exercise that we've done already very large number of time of helping organizations leverage these tools in the best possible way from wherever they're starting in their their journey. We saw earlier in the polls that people are starting from very different stages, whether it's perceived or the reality. And that's really it, is understanding where we start from, what degrees of flexibility we have. For example, we were assessing earlier the investment that is required to improve or to remove one of the bottlenecks. This investment can actually be very different from one organization to another, depending on how they are set up within the broader organization, how close the communication is with other teams that might also be impacted. So there, it's really through services and support, and also experience of having done it multiple times, that you can really change people's mind. But as a whole, I would say that the scale of the numbers of the savings that I just showed you, over just three small improvements, saving $9 million on just a single program and saving 15% of the total budget, it's definitely helps in the decision, and it helps to reach years in a pretty high level as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is our final question, and so hopefully this one here, I believe, is for Sébastien. And the question is, where is the 70% waste number coming from?
So it's really some first. I mean, we have received a kind of a request coming from one pharma partner that we started working with 3 or 4 years ago, and to assess this kind of global waste level out of something like 200 clinical trials that were over. So we did receive all the data, analyze all the data with a pharma partner, and then this pharma partner did kind of communicate within different conferences about the outcomes of these results. It was something like 72 or 73% waste, to my best knowledge. And then later on, we did receive many different kind of requests coming from other pharma partners that we were just starting working with, about trying to assess basically where they were starting from. And I believe that's really something that's, as Cyrille just mentioned, I mean, when you build this kind of baseline about, in 2017 or 2018, my organization was starting from an average 70% waste level. It's not nice. I believe everyone understands. I mean, what does it mean? It means that that's the cost that you are ready to pay to make sure your patients are safely supplied, if that makes sense. Which, once again, is making sense for top management. They may accept it, this cost, but I believe they would definitely be super happy to work reducing this cost, especially, I mean, if it's not meaning any kind of risk for the patients, any kind of firefighting activities for the resources, and the study managers and so on. And as Cyrille just mentioned, I believe it's more about an optimization journey, a change management internally that may also involve really positive aspects about, getting more and more toward digital analytical aspects of the things, and really being able more to discuss with some stakeholders, colleagues, based on facts, based on data, and not that much based only on feelings. And I believe that's really helped a lot, I mean, an organization to move forward and make sure the time of the different managers from different departments is really truly leveraged. I believe it's really kind of the definition of being leaner, And I believe that's really the goal of these kind of organizations that went from 70% waste down to something like 29% within 2 or 3 years, something like this.
Okay, well, thank you very much for those questions, our audience members. Thank you so much. We have reached the end of the question and answer portion of this webinar. If we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at Enside may follow up with you after this presentation. If you have any further questions, direct them to the email address on your screen. Thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen shortly. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. Now I'm about to send you a link in your chat box. You'll be able to view the recording of this event at that link and also share this link with your colleagues when they register for the recording as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers, Sébastien Coppe and Cyrille Lefèvre, for their very insightful presentation. We hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your webinar moderator. On behalf of the team here at X-Talks, we thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Hunt. Until next time, take care and bye for now.